Hey, welcome back. We're going to talk about the roll mill today. The roll mill is what we use to imprint texture onto the metal, a wide area of texture. And you can use a variety of things, which we'll talk about later. So let's take a look at the roll mill itself. And you have at the top, you have a little dial here that when you turn it clockwise, it will put these two rollers closer together. When you turn this counterclockwise, it will move these two rollers further apart. And these two rollers, when you put metal between them and the gap between those two rollers is thinner than your metal, it will actually pressurize whatever material you choose. It will put pressure on that, and the metal, which is really cool, will receive that and end up texturing. In order to turn the rollers, you're going to use the hand crank right here. And one of the nice things about the roll mill is you can use it right-handed or you can use it left-handed. The trickiest part about the roll mill is getting these rollers to the right distance so that it imprints at a density that you want it to imprint. Because if those rollers are too close together, it's too hard to turn this crank. If they're too far apart, it's not going to put enough pressure on that to even imprint the metal. So I'm going to go ahead and use this. This is just a piece of ribbon that has some real thin wire in it, and we'll just see what this does. I haven't ever tried this one before. And I have a piece of copper, which has been annealed. Highly suggest that you anneal your metal before doing this, because the annealing process softens the metal up so where it will receive that texture much easier than if you have a work-hardened piece of metal. If your texturing surface, and anything really that's got a thickness to it can be used to texture metal, if you have a texturing surface that is a little bigger than what you're texturing, we can save that piece for someone else to use. So I'm going to trim it just bigger. And this wire on the end of it is a little bit thicker than this crisscross design. So what I'm going to do is test and see what that looks like. So I'm just going to offset that on my metal a little bit and go from there. Some of you guys are going to be tempted to wrap this around to hold it in place, or you think, you know what, if it slips on there, you might be tempted to use a piece of tape to tape that on there. And I would just caution you to think about the fact that the tape has some thickness to it. So if I put a piece of tape here to hold that in place, that could show up as it went through the roll mill on the front and the back of that. Similarly, if I take my material and I wrap it along the back, that is going to texture both sides. You may want that, you may not, but just be aware of that. So getting this set up is I'm going to give you the basics of what to look for, and you kind of have to adjust as you go. But the idea is this: you're going to get the rollers to be just thinner than the height of these two materials together. And the simplest way I found to do that is to go ahead and open the rollers so that the material fits all the way in. I should turn it the right way. There's a little cheat sheet up here that says open, turn it this way, closed, turn it this way. So I'm going to go ahead and open the rollers up so that slides nicely. I'm not going to keep this in here right now. All I am doing is testing to find the height of my material and the metal. So I'm going to gently close it until I meet a little bit of pressure. It's like a gentle hug. I don't want to crank it on there once I feel resistance. As soon as I feel resistance, I'm going to test and see if this comes out. It should not come out of there. So this is my starting point. That's the height, but I don't want my material in there right now. So one of the things I can do is move this dial to 0. There's a little red line right here, and that can remind me to get back to closed. Or I can intentionally open it half a turn. So those of you who want to think about this like a clock, you would open it from 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock. Those of you who want to think about it like a circle, it's a 180-degree turn. Sometimes I just put my finger here and I stop when the other end gets to it, so that's half a turn. So I can now take out my material, and then I'm ready to close it back to the height of the material plus some. So I'm going to close it back to the height of material. That was a half a turn. You can double check and make sure that goes back to 0. And then I'm going to add another half a turn to this to make this a little bit thinner. If you want it to be a deeper imprint, you're going to turn it a little bit more. If you turn it too much, you're going to be trying to turn this with two hands, and you have to like put all your body weight in to turn it. That's going to ruin this. So you'd want to back it out and then open it up just a smidge before you went and imprinted that. So I've done it a half a turn. Try to get the end of this as perpendicular as possible, because there will be some distortion when you pull this through. The longer the piece of metal, the more it distorts. This particular piece of metal will distort lengthways. So if I turn it and put it in this way, it's going to distort this way. So I'm going to line that up. I'm going to have it distort a little bit longer. We'll also thin out the metal a little bit. Put it as perpendicular as possible in here. Use my left hand to hold it in place, and I'm going to pull the crank and it will grab my metal. If I am right-handed, just go ahead and step on the other side of this and insert your metal into the jaws, or into the rollers right here. And you're going to turn, oh sorry, I mixed that up. If I am right-handed, I'll pull it here and I move this towards the metal. If I'm left-handed, it might be easier for you to put it in the back side right here and turn it towards the metal, so you'll be turning it this way. So I will go ahead and do this. It grabs it. I'm going to hold the material on there, because sometimes that can move off. I'm going to keep turning. Again, if I have to use two hands and pull that, that's your indication that might be too tight. Pull that through. It drops out the other side, and this is what I am left with. So I have my metal here, and you'll notice that it curved. So I talked about a little bit, it would distort. It's also a little bit thinner. This no longer has some thickness to it because it's been flattened out. So I'll go ahead and throw that in the trash can, because I cannot use that again, and I'm ready to move on with this. So I'm either going to integrate this into another piece of metal by soldering or cold riveting or cold connections riveting, or I'm going to keep it singly like this and do some cutting on it or some forming. Maybe I form it into a ring. So possibilities are kind of endless. You decide with your own creativity what you'd like to do with this. It does have fire scale on it, so I could put it in the pickle pot to remove that fire scale. Or I could take some 1000 emery and just put a satin finish on there. If you find that you want to roll mill a second texture on there, if you find that you want to stamp a texture on there, if you are forming it after this, highly suggest you go back and anneal that first before you do any of those things to loosen up those metal molecules, and that will make your life a lot easier. So in terms of, let's talk a little bit about the materials that you might choose to use. In terms of materials, if it gets too thick, so I've got two pieces of kind of mesh right here. This was a bag of, from a produce bag, probably lemons or limes, and it's really, really thin, and that will distort as it goes through that, and that can be kind of cool, happy accident, that kind of thing. But if you want to control it, you might go a little bit thicker. This, even though it moves, it won't distort as much. If you put it in this way to the roll mill, it will distort that way. If you put it in this way, there's less give. So just be aware of the material you choose. This material is, sometimes you find inspiration in, kind of odd places. This was some screen that I had left over from a project. So I used this as a textured piece, and that's actually from what I am wearing right here. So this piece is roll mill texture with the screen. It has a oxidized surface on it. This is also a roll mill texture from the screen. Sometimes, again, you will take it and keep it as a simple design. So you have a roll mill texture from a piece that is, and you can always refer to this texture board right here. There are some examples of what I have. Some of the stuff we still don't have in the box, but if you come across something you want to use, bring it in and we'll take a look at it. Burlap is kind of fun. Different types of ribbon come out, and they don't always come out like you think they might, so it's always a good idea to take a scrap piece of metal and test your texture first to see if it's what you want to have. But this little black plastic circles kind of distorted to these ovals, and that's what I ended up with. The piece I was just showing you right here is that right there. Now sometimes you'll notice over here I have a piece of metal. This is just a scrap piece of metal that was used as imprinting for this piece right there. If you choose to use metal, whether it be sheet metal or whether it be wire, please, please, please make sure that you purchase and you'll have to purchase a cover piece for it. So if I wanted to imprint this wire texture on here, that can damage the steel rollers. So I would want to put a cover piece on that and roll through. And you actually get 2 for 1 because it's going to imprint both of these at the same time. If your material's really, really thick, that makes it incredibly difficult to kind of figure out the height of that because there is some give there. But trial and error, you can experiment a little and see what you come up with. If it's flat, that makes it a little bit easier to figure that out. Now, if you're using a wire, I've got some wire here that I kept from the what they wrap the saw blades in, and it's probably about 32 gauge, so it's really, really thin. It's kind of like dental floss. This right here is about the thickness of the paper, so if I wanted to imprint that on my metal, I do not need a cover sheet if it's really, really thin. But if you're looking at an 18 gauge or thicker, or you would want to use a cover piece of metal for that. Another thing for those of you who like to kind of create your own textures is you can grab some tag board. And this tag board right here, it's not as thick as cardboard, but it's a little bit thicker than your basic paper. And it cuts with scissors really, really easily. And here is just kind of some hole punched out holes. And you'll notice that when it was imprinted on here, anything that was open sticks up. It's the same height of the metal. And anything where it's paper thins out a little bit. So this is just a basic zigzag on here. So you can do anything you want. You can use an X-Acto knife to get really detailed designs on there, or you can just use some scissors, or the last person to use this one just ripped it, because the edge of the ripped edge is kind of a little more organic in feeling. A cut edge is a little more geometric in feeling. Now sometimes you'll pick materials that look interesting but may not work as well. This doily is pretty thin, and it will imprint, but it's a light texture. This looks pretty cool in terms of its texture, but it's not, the height difference between where the pink glitter is and the white is not very big, so it does not give you a thick texture or thick imprint in there. So you want to be careful about, like I suggest, testing that before you start on your final piece. The other thing to consider is sometimes you change your mind in the design process and you've sawed something out, and this is going to be a ring eventually, and you think, you know what, I'd really like to put a texture on there. If I do that, it will distort. If I put it into the roll mill lengthways this way, it's going to make it longer and it will be a bigger size. If I put it into the roll mill this way, it's going to be wider, and I may not get even distortion on both ends. So it's just something to think about. Highly suggest that you run this through with your metal through the roll mill before you saw it out. And then after you run that through the roll mill, you can go ahead and glue your final design onto that once you've traced it in tracing paper, and go from there. And texturing can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. This is a bracelet that just has a single white, this was a ribbon that was laid on there to texture. It's got a border edge plus the texture of the ribbon right here. It's just a simple bracelet. This piece right here, the band ring is textured. And then there's some other stuff that happens on top to provide contrast and visual interest. And then here we have a little bit of kind of a double-sided, you've got some texture right here contrasting with the different colors of the metal, and then you've got just the surface of the metal on the back from here. So there's your roll mill, and until next time, bye-bye.